Also, a couple quick announcements. Just want to have everybody in prayer for Pastor as he's on travel. He's actually going to be preaching this morning at Pastor Tillman's church. Y'all know that Pastor Tillman had a stroke the other week. But it's interesting how he has, in the midst of that, a Romans 8:28 mentality, because earlier this week he texted my father, and these were his exact words: "The Lord blessed me with a stroke." That is a powerful testimony to how, even in the midst of adversity, you can still place your faith and trust in the Lord, that he will work everything out. So ask that y'all pray for Pastor, that y'all pray for Pastor Tillman, and also those that are sick and shut in and could not make it here. We pray for complete, total restoration. So again, real quick, turn to your neighbor and say, neighbor, I'm prepared for success. Chris Gardner was determined to prepare for success. Chris Gardner was born February 9th, 1954, and he had a life that was fraught with many personal challenges. He was born to a mother who went to prison twice during his young life, once for alleged welfare fraud and another time for attempted arson. And he would say that he understood why she went to prison the second time for attempted arson, because she was attempting to burn down the house where his abusive stepfather was, a stepfather who physically abused him and his mother repeatedly. Matter of fact, he recalls a story of how on Christmas Day he was put out of his house by his stepfather while being stark naked in the cold and was threatened with a shotgun. These are the situations that he was dealing with. He grew up in a neighborhood full of drugs and full of violence. This is a man who would tell you that he grew up in a neighborhood where he was actually raped by a young thief that was on the block. This is a man that would tell you that through all of his struggles, he would eventually try to find love and would marry, but his wife would have abandoned him and their newborn son. This is a man who would tell you that he fell on hard times in San Francisco and spent his days sleeping in motels and homeless shelters, and even on occasion on public bathroom floors. This is a man who would tell you that he dealt with some very challenging situations. And while trying to figure out a way to make ends meet, he would have a once-in-a-lifetime encounter that would change his life. Because as he was struggling to make ends meet, he ended up coming across this gentleman who was sharply dressed and driving a Ferrari. And he said that he had only two questions for this man. He said, "What do you do? And how do you do it? What do you do? And how do you do it?" And so this man told him that he was a stockbroker that was making $80,000 a month. And so that day, Chris Gardner decided that that is what he wanted to be. And he said in his mind, he decided that day that he was going to be a stockbroker. And so with that in mind, he decided in that moment that he would prepare for success. And two things become noteworthy as he prepared for success. First, he developed a step-by-step plan for his success. He developed a step-by-step plan for his success. His plan was both personal and professional. Personally, given all of the things that he went through growing up, he said step by step, these are the things that he would do. He would have no alcohol in his life. He would have no violence in his life. He was determined to feed his son. He was determined to find shelter for his son. And he was determined to not just be a father, but be a dad to his son. So he had a personal step-by-step plan for success. But he also had a professional step-by-step plan for success. Because once he got his first opportunity at an internship, he determined that he would be the first one in the office and the last one to leave. He determined that once he got to the office, he was going to make 200 calls to prospective clients every day. He was determined that he was going to study for his Series 7 exam every day. And he was determined that he was going to pass his Series 7 exam one day. So he had not only a personal plan, but a professional plan. And each of these he developed step by step for success. And then finally, he determined that he would demonstrate publicly the results of his success. He would demonstrate publicly the results of his success, because he would be sure to buy a house that everybody could see, a house so that he could raise his son. He would be sure to buy a Ferrari just like that stockbroker that he encountered, just to show everybody. He would be sure to support Glide Memorial United Methodist Church and Reverend Cecil Williams, the gentleman who took him into his homeless shelter to raise his son. And he would support them just to show everybody else. And he will be sure to provide economic opportunities for those that were disenfranchised or down out on their luck, so he could show them the opportunities that they can have in order to achieve success. And so at this point in his life, he had laser-like focus on his plan. Yeah. Not his circumstances, but on his plan as he prepared for success. And well, ladies and gentlemen, you need to realize that regardless of your circumstances, your obstacles, your difficulties, or what you're going through, you need to focus on God's plan for your life. And that means that you need to take the time to properly prepare for success. And that means that you must develop a step-by-step plan for your success. And it also means you must demonstrate publicly what God has done to make you a success, because those are two critical steps that round off how to prepare for success. So the question we're going to deal with today is quite simply this. How do you prepare for success? How do you prepare for success? Well, if you will, turn with me to the book of 1 Samuel chapter 17. And we're going to continue to read where David shows us how to prepare for success. And if you will, please stand with me for the reading of God's word. And again, we're in 1 Samuel chapter 17. We're going to start at verse 38, and we're going to read through verse 51. If you have it, say amen. Amen. It reads as follows. Then Saul clothed David with his garments and put a bronze helmet on his head, and he clothed him with armor. David girded his sword over his armor and tried to walk, for he had not tested them. So David said to Saul, I cannot go with these, for I have not tested them. And David took them off. He took a stick in his hand and chose for himself 5 smooth stones from the brook and put them in the shepherd's bag which he had, even in his pouch. And his sling was in his hand, and he approached the Philistine. Then the Philistine came on and approached David with the shield bearer in front of him. When the Philistine looked and saw David, he disdained him, for he was but a youth and a ruddy with a handsome appearance. The Philistine said to David, Am I a dog that you come to me with sticks? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. The Philistine also said to David, Come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the sky and the beasts of the field. Then David said to the Philistine, You come to me with a sword, a spear, and a javelin. But I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have taunted. This day the Lord will deliver you up into my hands, and I will strike you down and remove your head from you. And I will give the dead bodies of the army of the Philistines this day to the birds of the sky and the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel, and that all this assembly may know that the Lord does not deliver by sword or by spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands. Then it happened when the Philistine rose and came down and drew near to meet David, that David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet the Philistine. And David put his hand into his bag and took from it a stone and slung it and struck the Philistine on his forehead. And the stone sank into his forehead, so that he fell on his face to the ground. Thus David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone, and he struck the Philistine and killed him. But there was no sword in David's hand. Then David ran and stood over the Philistine and took his sword and drew it out of his sheath and killed him and cut off his head with it. When the Philistines saw that their champion was dead, they fled. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to round off this sermon series on just these few words. Preparing for success. Now go high five 3 people and let them know, I'm preparing for success. Go ahead and tell them, I'm preparing for success. Doesn't matter how bleak it is. Doesn't matter how big the challenge is. Doesn't matter what your obstacles are. You need to know with God on your side, nothing can take you down. And because of that, you need to start preparing for success. Y'all know we've been in the book of 1 Samuel. This book that was written by the prophet Samuel mostly. And he was born to a barren woman. You find this out in 1 Samuel 1 and 2. You find out also that he was called to service 3 times in a dream by the Lord. He eventually becomes a prophet, and from his birth to his ordination to his service, Samuel's life is a reflection of God's authority in one's life. This book basically deals with Israel's transition from a theocracy to a monarchy. Again, Samuel deals with the transition from a theocracy to a monarchy. Theocracy being a government ruled by God, monarchy being a government ruled by a king. Now, y'all know Israel was first ruled by God. But what happens is they see all of these other nations and they want to be just like them. So they say, God, we want a king. God, we want a king. God, we want a king. But the thing that they weren't realizing is that God didn't want them to be like everybody else. He wanted them to be separated from everybody else. And he wanted to show that you don't need a king. All you need is the king, Yahweh, King and God Almighty. And so really this book deals with the fact that regardless of who sits on the throne, God ultimately sits on the throne. Regardless of what king might be in control, God is still the one that is ultimately in control. And so you can really call this book Israel's transition from theocracy to monarchy. And the theme being, from theocracy to monarchy, God is still in charge. From theocracy to monarchy, God is still in charge. And you can pretty much break 1st and 2nd Samuel into really 4 stories dealing with different characters. 1 Samuel chapters 1 through 7 deals with God and Samuel. 1 Samuel chapter 8 through 15 deals with God, Samuel, and Saul. 1 Samuel chapter 16 through 31 deals with God, Samuel, Saul, and David. And then finally, all of 2 Samuel deals with God and David. So now when we get to 1 Samuel chapter 17, we're in the section where not only has Israel begged for a king and God is obliged by giving them Saul, but Saul turns out to be a problematic king, and this problematic king brings a whole bunch of problems to Israel. And one of the problems that they have is with this nation of Philistine. And these Philistines basically go to war with them. And right now they're facing off at this valley of Elah for this huge battle. And what you need to understand is that this battle is not set up to be actually versus David and Goliath. It's actually set up to be God versus Satan. Because God is ultimately the hero in every biblical story. And the scene is set up to show that when God is in control of your life, it is a setup for success in your life. And so this story of David shows us that when God be for you, he will prepare you for success. He will prepare you for success. And so y'all know that in the sermon series, we described 7 steps for success. 7 steps for success. And just as a reminder, the 7 steps are as follows. If you want to prepare yourself for success, first, you got to describe it. You got to describe it. Second, you got to deal with it. You got to deal with it. Third, you got to decide it. You got to decide it. Fourth, you got to discover it. You got to discover it. Fifth, you got to depend on it. You got to depend on it. Sixth, you got to develop it. You got to develop it. And 7, you got to demonstrate it. You got to demonstrate it. All right. So today, as we close out this sermon series, we're going to deal with step 6 and 7, developing it and demonstrating it. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. I'm going to need your prayers and your amens on today, because this is a message that all of us can take into the world and share it with the dying world and share it with our fellow brothers and sisters in Christ to be an encouragement to them. So if you're with me, let me hear you say amen. And what I want you to remember when we get to the tail end of this sermon, I want to say a phrase and I want you to have a response. The phrase I'm going to say is God did it. And I want you to respond by saying, that's how. So let's try it out. God did it. That's how. God did it. That's how. All right. So just remember that when we get to the end of the sermon. Let's talk about step number 6. Step 6 in preparing for success. You must develop a step-by-step plan that places your faith in God for success. I'm going to say that one more time. You must develop a step-by-step plan that places your faith in God for success. Look at verses 38 through 46. And it says, then Saul clothed David with his garments and put a bronze helmet on his head. And he clothed him with armor. David girded his sword over his armor and tried to walk, for he had not tested them. So David said to Saul, I cannot go with these, for I have not tested them. And David took them off. He took a stick in his hand and chose for himself 5 smooth stones from the brook and put them in the shepherd's bag which he had, even in his pouch. And his sling was in his hand. And he approached the Philistine. Then the Philistine came on and approached David with the shield bearer in front of him. When the Philistine looked and saw David, he disdained him, for he was but a youth and a ruddy with a handsome appearance. The Philistine said to David, am I a dog that you come to me with sticks? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods, lowercase g. Then the Philistine also said to David, come to me and I will give your flesh to the birds of the sky and the beasts of the field. Then David said to the Philistine, you come to me with a sword, a spear, and a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have taunted. This day the Lord will deliver you up into my hands, and I will strike you down and remove your head from you. And I will give the dead bodies of the armies of the Philistines this day to the birds of the sky and the wild beasts of the earth. So here, Samuel shows how David basically developed a step-by-step plan that placed his faith in God for his success. Now, what you end up noticing as you read through these scriptures, there's a dichotomy, there's a direct contrast. There is a, you can get with this or you can get with that type scenario. And basically what Samuel shows here is the difference between plans that solely depend upon man and plans that mainly depend upon God. Right. A contrast between plans that solely depend upon man and plans that mainly depend upon God. What you find out is that plans that solely depend upon man can fail, whereas plans that mainly depend upon God will succeed. Again, plans that solely depend upon man can fail, but plans that mainly depend upon God will succeed. How do we know this? Well, when you talk about the plans that solely depend upon man, you talk about Saul and you talk about Goliath. Because each of them basically made the mistake of thinking that this was some regular old warfare. Right. They thought this was a regular battle. They thought this was a regular fight. And so they thought that in this natural fight, they only needed natural power. And that was a huge mistake. But you'll find this out because in verses 38 to 39, what do we see? Saul basically gives David his armor. So you can imagine that he gives him his breastplate. He gives him his loin cover. He gives him his shin guards. He gives him his helmet. He gives him all of these things. But David tries them on and is like, hey, man, this quite don't work for me, right? So that plan that Saul had for David surely would have failed. Then you go to verses 41 through 45, and you find out that Goliath came at David with the same mentality of Saul, because he comes at him with this natural armor. He comes to him with a sword, comes to him with a spear, comes to him with a javelin, comes to him with a shield bearer. Why? Because both Saul and Goliath, they basically thought that they had everything that they needed for victory in and of themselves. They thought that everything they needed for victory they had in their grasp in and of themselves. And because of that, neither of their plans worked. Saul's armor didn't work for David, and Goliath's weapons didn't work against David. And so what you need to realize, ladies and gentlemen, is that any plans that you make that are separated and apart from God are subject to fail. When you think about this, you can think about the fact that the world has all of these plans and all of these schemes and all of these ways that they think that they can get successful. We can start taking a few examples. You can think about Tony Bosch and biogenesis, where he thought if I just sell these steroids to Alex Rodriguez and all of these athletes, well, that'll make me a success. You can think about Frank Lucas from the movie American Gangster and his drug dealing in Harlem, New York, where he thought, well, if I just sell this heroin, that'll make me a success. You can think about Houston and think about Alan Stanford and the Stanford Financial Group, where he thought that if I just get these millions and billions of dollars in this Ponzi scheme, that'll make me a success. You can think about Kim Kardashian on that TV show, Keeping Up with the Kardashians, where she thought all she needed was a sex tape and some reality TV, and that would make her a success. And then when you start looking at the tail end of how their stories ends out, it all ends up subject to fail. Tony Bosch, his steroid sales end up getting him facing 10 years and sent to prison. Frank Lucas ends up getting a 70-year sentence to a state prison. Alan Stanford ends up getting a 110-year sentence to a federal prison. And then Kim Kardashian gets a life sentence to a knucklehead known as Kanye West. So all I'm trying to get you to understand is that any plan that you develop apart from God are definitely subject to failure. That's all I'm trying to get you to understand. However, the flip side, when you have plans that mainly depend upon God, they will succeed. How do we know this? Because look at what David does. And when you look at verses 40 through 46, David astutely realized that this wasn't regular old warfare. This is spiritual warfare. This wasn't a regular old fight. This was a spiritual fight. And so he realized that since this was a supernatural event, he needed supernatural power. But notice how he basically has a moment where he combines not only his human responsibility, but he also combines it with God's divine intervention. Look at verse 40, where he has step-by-step preparation. He gives us an outline of how we need to do this thing. Notice that it says that he chose 5 smooth stones. So now notice, he didn't choose just a few stones. He didn't say he chose 2 stones. He chose 7. He didn't say he chose 3. And so he had a specific number that he chose. And he didn't just choose any type of rocks. He didn't choose just some, jagged rocks or, broken up rocks or anything like that. It specifically said that he chose 5 smooth stones. He could have picked up any kind of stones, but he was specific in how he did it. So the first thing you need to realize, as you start doing your step-by-step preparations, you need to pay close attention to every detail. Then also notice that it said that he put them in his shepherd's bag. Now notice he didn't have a Gucci bag. He didn't have a Prada bag. He didn't have a Fendi bag. He just used the bag that he happened to have being a shepherd. So what this means for us is that we need to make efficient and effective use of the resources that we're blessed with. So what you don't have a Bentley, you better be glad that you got a Hyundai. So what you ain't got the newest Jordans, you better be glad that you got some K-Swiss. Whatever it is that God has blessed you with, you need to make efficient use of what he's giving you. Then you notice that it says, and he went with a sling in his hand. A sling in his hand. So now, notice, he was offered by Saul. He had the sword, he had the breastplate of armor, he had the helmet, he had the shin guards, but he got rid of all of that and chose just one weapon. He didn't need a whole bunch of weapons. He only needed one weapon. So in other words, he made efficient use of the resources that he had. He didn't need a whole bunch of stuff. He knew all he needed was one thing. And you need to realize that as you make your step-by-step preparations, all you need is one capability and one God, one ability and one Savior, one thing that you do well, and a God that can see you all through all the hell that you go through in your life. That's all you need as you prepare step by step. But notice, he didn't just have step-by-step preparation. He also had step-by-step prayer. Not just step-by-step preparation, but step-by-step prayer. Because notice, when you get to verses 45 and 46, he said, you come to me with a sword, a spear, and the javelin. Here comes the prayer. But I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel. And this day the Lord will deliver you up into my hands. So now, notice what he does. He identifies the Lord of hosts. He identifies that he's served by the God of all. Then he identifies the Lord of Israel. So he's saying not just this big God, but he's identifying it's my God. And then he said, and the Lord will deliver. So he basically says this big God that is my God is going to do it on my behalf. And that's what you need to have in your mind when you get in your prayer closet or when you get down on your knees every morning. You need to not just feel like you're facing the world by yourself. You're not in this thing by yourself, but this great big God who happens to be your God will see you through your situation. And then not only did he have step-by-step preparation, he also had a step-by-step prayer, and he also had a step-by-step plan of attack. Look at verse 46, where he says, I will strike you down and remove your head from you. I will give the dead bodies of the army of the Philistines this day to the birds of the sky and the wild beasts of the earth. So in other words, what David did, whether through his step-by-step preparation, his step-by-step prayer, or his step-by-step plan of attack, was realize that all you had to do was place his plans in God's hands and combine his plans with God's power. And we need to realize, ladies and gentlemen, that that's what we need to do. We need to take our plans and put them in God's hands, and take our plans and combine them with his power. Because when you put them in God's hands and combine it with his power, he can take you from mediocre to monumental. He can take what was a hobby and turn it into a passion. He can take a good idea and turn it into a great invention. He can take a small startup and turn it into the Forbes list. So I encourage you, regardless of what you're dealing with, to take your detailed plans and put them in the hands of the Lord. Give the Lord some praise. Nudge your neighbor and tell him you better make your plans and put them in God's hands. So, not only did he develop a step-by-step plan that placed his faith in God for success, but the next thing we learn that you and I can apply is step 7. You need to be ready to demonstrate publicly what God has done to make you a success. You need to demonstrate publicly what God has done to make you a success. Look at verses 46 to 51. Notice that he says, and he said, I will give the dead bodies of the armies of the Philistines this day to the birds of the sky and the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel, and that all this assembly may know that the Lord does not deliver by sword or by spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands. Then it happened, when the Philistine rose and came and drew near to meet David, that David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet the Philistine. And David put his hand into his bag and took from it a stone and slung it and struck the Philistine on his forehead. And the stone sank into his forehead so that he fell on his face to the ground. Thus David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone. And he struck the Philistine and killed him. But there was no sword in David's hand. Then David ran and stood over the Philistine and took his sword and drew it out of his sheath and killed him and cut off his head with it. When the Philistines saw that their champion was dead, they fled. So now here, Samuel shows that David demonstrated publicly what God had done to make him a success. Notice that in verses 46 to 47, you basically have first, David makes a public declaration of what God would do. He made a public declaration of what God would do. David was so convinced of what God would do that he started making his boast in the Lord. He started bragging to this 9'9" giant that stood in front of him. Yeah. Notice what he said. He said, "This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. The Lord does not deliver by sword or by spear. The battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands." David wasn't worried about the armies to the left. He wasn't worried about the armies to the right. He wasn't worried about the armies behind him, the ones in front of him, or this big giant that stood in front of him. Despite all of the challenges that surrounded him, David declared his confidence in God. And what we need to do, ladies and gentlemen, is start declaring our confidence in God. Despite all of our challenges, we need to realize that we have the ability to speak life into our situation. And you can tell yourself, you know what, on my own, I cannot, but with God, I surely can. You know, you need to tell yourself, on my own, I may not be able to protect my child in the streets, but God can. You know, on my own, I can't handle all these classes and these exams, but with God, I can. I may not be able to get out of all of this debt, but with God, I can. I may not be able to deal with this trifling people at work, but with God, I can. I may not be able to overcome my criminal past, but with God, I can. I may not be able to restore my broken marriage, but with God, I can. I may not be able to heal from these scars of abuse, but with God, I can. And I may not be able to see myself out of this situation, but with God, I can. And so you need to always remember that God is with you and he will see you through. Give the Lord some praise. So you need to start making a declaration in advance of what God is going to do in your life, to you, through you, and for you. But not only does David make a public declaration of what God would do, but then you see a public demonstration of what God did do. Notice that David takes this opportunity to make a public spectacle of Goliath. All about what God can do, showing the power of God. He goes into battle. Remember, when he goes into battle against Goliath, he's overmatched in size. He's overmatched in strength. He's overmatched in weaponry. But he manages to drop Goliath with one sling, one stone, and one shot. One sling, one stone, one shot. And then he not only does that, but to add insult to Goliath's injury, he then goes, takes Goliath's own sword and cuts off Goliath's head, and then holds up his head and parades it around all of the town for everybody to see. So in other words, what basically went on is David showed the entirety of the world what would happen when God shows up and when God shows out. And what we need to do, ladies and gentlemen, is we need to get to the point that we are bold and courageous enough that when God does something miraculous in our lives, we can show the world what happens when God shows up and when God shows out. Let me give you a perfect example of what I'm talking about. Some of y'all may have been watching football on last week. Anybody watch the AFC Championship game? Where it was the Seahawks versus the Green Bay Packers? But when I thought about this section, I thought about Russell Wilson. Y'all know Russell Wilson is the quarterback for the Seattle Seahawks. And basically, facing up against the Green Bay Packers, this game would determine who would go to the Super Bowl and face the New England Patriots. And what I find out is that Russell Wilson demonstrated not only step 6, but also step 7 that we were talking about. Because he would tell you that they had a step-by-step plan. He said that they would run the ball with Marshawn Lynch. They would hit the receivers in the secondary, and they would throw the deep ball if it was there. Marshawn Lynch would run the ball. That would soften up the secondary. When the secondary was softened up, they would start doing hitting the receivers in the secondary. And when the secondary started pulling up close to the line, they would start throwing the deep ball. That was their plan, and they kept on working. The problem was, even as they were working their plan, they ended up falling behind all the way into the third quarter to Green Bay, 20-0. And despite the fact that they're losing 20-0, all of a sudden things start turning around toward the tail end of the third quarter. They fake a field goal for a touchdown. And so now they're 20-7. And then you get to the fourth quarter, and with only just over 2 minutes in the quarter to go in the fourth quarter, Russell Wilson gets in on a quarterback sneak. Then they have an onside kick. And then Marshawn Lynch runs in for a touchdown. In case you don't know what I'm talking about, they basically scored 15 points in the span of 44 seconds. And then they get into overtime, and then they have a touchdown pass to this man named Curse. Curse, earlier in the game, had dropped 2 passes and caused one of them to become an interception. And this man who failed earlier in the game ends up being the reason that they won the game. And then when you get to the post-game interview, Russell Wilson, with tears streaming down his face, and they asked him, in the midst of all of this opposition, how did you do it? and he uttered these simple words. God prepared me for this moment. What am I trying to get you to say? Understand, ladies and gentlemen. I think Russell Wilson was saying that God did it, and that's how. God did it. God did it. God did it. And you to be willing to do the same thing that Russell Wilson did, because you are a living testimony. And when you start thinking about the goodness of God and all that he's done in your life, you can start telling the world, God did it. Because I promise you, when you talk to Sister Penny, she can tell you that she got promotions despite the fact that she was dealing with layoffs in her industry. And I think if you ask her personally, she would tell you, God did it. When you go to Sister Joanne, even when she was dealing with a health problem, she would come in Sunday after Sunday. On Saturday, she had a health challenge. On Sunday, she's declaring healing. And I think she would tell you that God did it. When you think about Pete going through 2 strokes, but he's able to come up here and lead service at Sunday after Sunday, I think he will tell you that God did it. And when you think about Frank D, who almost lost his voice to a health condition, but on last Sunday, he can get up here, have a testimony and a song on his heart, I think he will say that God did it. And when you think about Brother Tony on the piano, and that he was unemployed for a year and a half, and despite all that, he never missed a beat and got hired in the middle of the school year, he will tell you God did it. And then when you start thinking about Sister Julia, a member of our church, who used to be a drug addict and is now a church greeter, and then went from a church greeter to a college student, I think she would tell you God did it. And when you think about Pastor Tillman, who despite going through the stroke, had the clarity of mind to sit up and send a text saying, God bless me in the midst of all that, I think I'll tell you that God did it. And when you think about Brother Daniels, surviving 2 world wars, surviving a Great Depression, surviving the bubble of 2008, and surviving nearly 100 years, I think she would tell you God did it. And so all I'm trying to get you to understand is when you look back over your life, you need to realize that God did it before, then surely he'll do it again. Give the Lord some praise. Chris Gardner was determined to prepare for success. And so he developed a step-by-step plan for his success and determined that he would publicly demonstrate his success. Now, some of y'all may have recognized the man in the story. In case you didn't, as far as a step-by-step plan, he did successfully raise his son to be better than even his absentee father or than his abusive stepfather. He did successfully pass his Series 7 exam on his first try. And passing that exam turned to an internship with Dean Witter. That internship turned into a job at Bear Stearns. And that job turned into him being the owner of his own brokerage firm. That's how he had his step-by-step plan. And as far as demonstrating his success, he did purchase a home for him and his son. Yeah. He ended up buying a Ferrari. And ironically, he ended up buying his Ferrari from Michael Jordan himself. He ended up supporting the church shelter that brought him in and all of the volunteers there. He did end up funding a $50 million project in San Francisco for housing and economic opportunities for those that were disenfranchised. He then further demonstrated his success by writing a book called The Pursuit of Happiness. Yeah. The Pursuit of Happiness ends up becoming a movie that was done by Will Smith. And not only that, all of his actions and his activities manifested in, he said, was one of the culminating moments of his life. Whereas he's developing all of these opportunities for others, he wanted to even develop opportunities in South Africa. Yeah. And it brings him into the home of Nelson Mandela. And he said when he met Nelson Mandela, he broke down into tears because Nelson Mandela looked at him and said, "Welcome home, son." Yeah. He said, "I had to be 46 years old before I finally heard a man utter the words, 'Welcome home, son.'" And he did all of that because he was determined to prepare for success. Amen. Well, ladies and gentlemen, you got to be just as determined as Chris Gardner, that no matter what your situation or your circumstances, that you will prepare for success. So my challenge to you, ladies and gentlemen, my challenge to you is to remember all 7 of those steps. Describe exactly what you need and what you want to accomplish. Deal with the known barriers in your life. Decide that you want to be successful. Discover your God-given capabilities. Depend on God's power, potential, and presence in your life. Develop a step-by-step plan that places your faith in God. And then finally, demonstrate publicly what God has done for you. And if you are ready and willing to do all 7 of those things, I promise you, in 2015, that's how you prepare for success. God bless you and keep you is my fervent prayer. And heart, peace, those being said, in Christ shall you conquer.